The old theater stood silent in the heart of downtown Los Angeles, its marquee dark for the first time in decades. Inside, dust particles danced in the afternoon sunlight that streamed through cracked windows, illuminating a stage that had once hosted legends. This was the Apollo West, and tonight it would close its doors forever. Marcus Thompson swept the stage methodically, his weathered hands gripping the broom handle with practiced ease. At 68, he had been the theater's caretaker for over 30 years, watching countless performers grace these very boards. But none had left an impression quite like the young man who had performed here on a magical night in 1983. The memory came flooding back as Marcus paused in his sweeping. It was December 15th, and snow was falling gently outside, a rare sight in LA. A young performer, barely 25, had rented the theater for what he called a private rehearsal. But Marcus knew better. He had seen the pain in those dark eyes, the weight of fame pressing down on shoulders that seemed too young to carry such a burden. "Mr. Thompson," a voice called from the back of the theater. Marcus looked up to see a young woman with curly hair and determined eyes walking down the aisle. She carried a worn leather satchel and moved with the confident stride of someone on a mission. "Theater's closed, miss," Marcus called back. "We're shutting down for good tonight." "I know," she replied, reaching the stage. "My name is Diana Wells. I'm a journalist and I'm writing a story about this place. I heard you were here that night, December 15th, 1983, when he performed alone." Marcus set down his broom and studied the young woman carefully. Over the years, many reporters had tried to get him to talk about that night, but he had always refused. There was something sacred about what he had witnessed, something that felt too precious to share with the world. But as he looked around the empty theater, knowing it would soon be demolished, he felt a different kind of weight settling on his chest. "Why should I tell you?" Marcus asked, his voice gentle but guarded. Diana opened her satchel and pulled out a faded photograph. It showed a young Michael Jackson on this very stage, mid-spin, his sequined glove catching the stage lights like captured starlight. "Because I was there too," she said quietly. "I was 15, working as an usher. My mother was the theater manager, and I've never forgotten what I saw that night." Marcus felt his resistance crumble. He had been alone with that memory for so long, carrying it like a secret flame in his heart. Perhaps it was time to let someone else tend to that fire. "Sit down, child," he said, gesturing to the front row of red velvet seats. "Let me tell you about the night magic came to dance on this old stage." Diana settled into her seat, pulling out a small recording device. Marcus shook his head. "No recordings. Some stories are meant to be told, not captured." She nodded and put the device away, taking out a notebook instead. Marcus walked to center stage, his footsteps echoing in the empty space. He came in around 8 o'clock that evening. I remember because I was about to lock up when I heard the stage door open. He was wearing dark sunglasses even though it was snowing outside, and a red leather jacket that seemed to glow under the lobby lights. The old caretaker's eyes grew distant as he continued. "He looked tired, miss. Not physically tired, though he was that too, but tired in his soul. You could see it in the way he carried himself, like he was holding up the whole world, and it was getting heavier by the day." Diana scribbled notes rapidly, her eyes never leaving Marcus's face. "What did he say to you?" "He asked if he could use the stage for a few hours. Said he needed to remember something important. I should have said no. We weren't insured for after-hours use." But there was something in his voice, a kind of desperation wrapped up in politeness. So I said yes. Marcus began to pace the stage, his movements unconsciously mimicking memories of that long-ago night. He went straight to the sound booth and put on a cassette tape. Billie Jean started playing, but it wasn't the version everyone knew. This was different, raw, like it had just been born. And then he began to dance. The old man paused, his eyes glistening. "I've seen thousands of performers on the stage, child. Broadway stars, Hollywood legends, musicians who could make angels weep. But what I saw that night?" He shook his head in wonder. "It wasn't just dancing. It was conversation between a man and music itself." Diana looked up from her notes. "What do you mean?" He moved like the music was speaking to him personally, like it was telling him secrets that only he could understand. Every step, Every spin, every gesture, it all meant something. He wasn't performing for an audience. He was performing for himself, trying to find something he had lost. Marcus stopped pacing and stood in the exact spot where Michael had danced. About halfway through the song, something changed. The pain in his movement started to transform into something else. Joy, maybe, or at least acceptance. He did that moonwalk of his, you know the one, but it was different than anything I'd seen on TV. It was like he was floating on sorrow and landing in hope. How long did he dance? Diana asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Hours, Marcus replied. He played that same song over and over, each time finding something new in it. Sometimes he would stop and just stand there, breathing hard, his hands on his knees. Then he would straighten up, hit play again, and dive back into the music like a man diving into the ocean. The caretaker walked to the edge of the stage and sat down, his legs dangling over the side like a child's. Around midnight, your mother came by. She had forgotten some paperwork and saw the lights on. I was worried she'd be angry, but when she saw him dancing, she just stood in the back and watched. We both did. Diana's pen had stopped moving. What happened then? She started crying, Marcus said simply. Not sad tears, but the kind you cry when you witness something beautiful and terrible at the same time. And that's when I realized what I was seeing. This wasn't just a man dancing. This was a man trying to dance his way back to himself. The afternoon light was beginning to fade, casting long shadows across the theater. Marcus stood up and walked to an old wooden stool that sat in the wings. He picked it up and placed it center stage. Near the end, he sat on this very stool and just listened to the music without moving. The song was playing, but he was perfectly still. I thought maybe he had given up, that whatever he was searching for wasn't there. But then, right at the moment when the song was about to end, he stood up and did something I'll never forget. What? Diana asked, leaning forward in her seat. He took off that sequin glove, his trademark glove, and placed it on this stool. Then he stepped back and saluted it, like a soldier saluting a fallen comrade. The music ended, and the theater was completely quiet. Even the street noise outside seemed to have stopped. Marcus picked up the stool and held it in his hands, as if it still contained some essence of that magical night. He stood there for the longest time, just staring at that glove. And then, very quietly, he said, "Thank you." Or your mother, but to the music, to the stage. Diana stood up and walked onto the stage, her footsteps echoing in the vast space. What happened to this place after that night? We kept it running for as long as we could, Marcus replied. Your mother used to say that the theater had been blessed that night, that something special lived in these walls now. And you know what? She was right. Some of the best performances I ever saw happened on this stage after that December night. It was like he left some of his magic behind. As if on cue, the ghost light, a single bulb on a tall stand that theaters traditionally leave burning when empty, flickered on automatically. Marcus chuckled. That light's been acting up for weeks. The electrician says there's nothing wrong with it, but it turns itself on every night at exactly 8 o'clock. Same time he arrived that night. Diana looked around the theater one more time, trying to memorize every detail. What happens to all this now? Demolition starts next week. They're building a parking garage. Marcus's voice was matter-of-fact, but Diana could hear the sorrow underneath. 40 years of music and dreams, reduced to rubble and rebar. But the memories will survive, Diana said gently. The stories will live on. Marcus nodded, shouldering his cleaning supplies. That's why I told you about that night, child. Some stories are too important to die with the buildings that house them. He paused at the edge of the stage and looked back at the spotlight. I still hear music sometimes when I'm here alone. Just faint. Like an echo of an echo, but it's there. Billie Jean floating through the air like a whispered prayer. As they walked toward the exit together, Diana asked one final question. Do you think he ever came back? Marcus stopped at the stage door and pulled out his keys. Not that I know of. But sometimes, when I'm locking up late at night, I catch a glimpse of movement on the stage. Just for a second, in my peripheral vision. A figure spinning under that ghost light, dancing with shadows and memories. He turned the key in the lock for the final time. Maybe some people never really leave the places where they found themselves. Maybe a part of him is still in there. Still dancing, still searching, still finding new meanings in old songs. Outside, the snow was beginning to fall again, just as it had on that magical December night 39 years ago. Diana and Marcus stood on the sidewalk, looking up at the dark marquee that would never shine again. "Thank you for sharing that story," Diana said, extending her hand. Marcus shook it warmly. "Thank you for listening, child, and for caring enough to remember." As Diana walked away, disappearing into the swirling snow, Marcus took one last look at the Apollo West. Tomorrow, the wrecking ball would come, and this monument to music and dreams would become nothing more than dust and memory. But tonight, in the space between sunset and full darkness, it still stood as a testament to the power of art to heal, to transform, and to remind us who we really are when everything else is stripped away. In the distance, barely audible above the wind, Marcus could swear he heard the opening notes of Billie Jean drifting through the air. He smiled, pulled his coat tighter against the cold, and walked away into the night, carrying with him the memory of the evening when the king of pop danced alone with his ghosts, and found his way back to himself on a small stage in downtown Los Angeles. The theater stood empty, but not silent. For those who knew how to listen, the music would play forever.